The land called itself free. It was painted in colors of liberty, its banners lifted high in the wind, and its leaders spoke of equality as though it were a treasure handed down to every soul. Yet beneath the surface, the truth was crueler than any dream. The promises of freedom had cracks, and in those cracks, people like her fell through. She had grown up watching others hold weapons with pride, their polished rifles gleaming under the sun, while she was left with scraps, half-functioning, tools and broken dreams. The day the armory opened, when weapons were distributed to the fighters who would stand against the commander's ruthless army, she stepped forward with the same fire as the rest. Men laughed at her presence, some mockingly, some nervously, because, in their minds, a woman's place was behind walls, not on the battlefield. Still, she pressed forward, determined to prove that courage was not bound by gender. The quartermaster sneered as he handed her what seemed like a joke, a rifle with its barrel slightly bent, its trigger stiff and unreliable. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight, feeling the insult. Around her, others were testing their weapons, hearing the satisfying click and clack of functional steel. She pressed her trigger once it clicked, then jammed. Laughter erupted. "She won't even fire a shot before she's taken down," one man said. "She be a liability," another muttered. "Send her home," a third chuckled, but she didn't flinch. She cradled the broken rifle, her fingers running along its cold frame. To them, it was a weapon destined for failure. To her, it was a mirror, a reflection of how the world saw her, flawed, weak, incapable. Yet there was a strange power in that moment. She realized that just as this rifle was underestimated, so was she. The land itself mirrored her broken weapon. The people were promised liberty, but most were chained to poverty, oppression, or silence. Villages were burned. Children grew up learning obedience rather than freedom, and the commander's soldiers marched like shadows across the soil, reminding everyone of their helplessness. Every cry for justice was muffled by the clang of boots. Every dream of equality was snuffed out by fire and iron, but broken things carried secrets. At night, when the campfire dwindled to embers, she sat alone with her rifle. She studied its every flaw, the crooked barrel, the heavy trigger, the unreliable chamber. Where others saw uselessness, she saw puzzles to solve. She practiced handling it in silence, imagining ways to turn its faults into opportunities. A straight barrel shot predictably, but a bent one might deceive. A jammed trigger slowed speed, but taught patience. If she couldn't rely on the weapon to kill, then perhaps she could use it to control the battlefield differently, through timing, positioning, and wit. Around her, soldiers boasted loudly. They spoke of the glory they'd earned, the songs that would be sung of their victories. They drank deeply, laughed freely, and sharpened their blades as though destiny itself had already promised them triumph. She stayed quiet, watching. In her silence, she absorbed everything, their habits, their weaknesses, their arrogance. She saw how they polished their guns, but neglected discipline, how they trusted in steel, but not in themselves. She was different. Her life had been a long apprenticeship in hardship. As a child, she learned that no one would fight her battles for her. When food was scarce, she hunted with traps fashioned from rope and rock. When storms broke her family's roof, she patched it with scraps and stubborn hands. When her father died in the fields, crushed by the weight of labor that never paid enough, she learned that tears could not rebuild what was lost. Survival was not given, it was taken. And so, when she held the broken rifle, she did not see despair. She saw destiny. The commander was a distant figure then, a shadowed name spoken in hushed tones. He was the iron fist of the land, the man whose presence made villages tremble. Rumors told of his cruelty of families torn apart, of innocents punished for rebellion, of entire towns burned, because someone dared to resist. To many, he was untouchable, a god of war who thrived on fear. But she did not fear gods. She feared silence. She feared submission. She feared the idea of growing old in chains, knowing she had never tried to break them. Her rifle might be broken, but her spirit was not. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in flames of red and gold, she stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. In the distance, the commander's campfires glowed like fallen stars, dotting the earth with menace. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and dust. Behind her, her own camp whispered with nervous energy, men sharpening swords and whispering prayers they pretended not to need. She listened, not to the noise, but to the silence beneath it, the silence of fear. Her fingers tightened on the rifle. She whispered to herself, a vow not to fate, nor to gods, nor to men, but to the broken steel in her hands. If I am broken, then I will fight as broken. If I am underestimated, then I will strike from the shadows. And when the time comes, this weapon, this useless mocked piece of iron, will be enough to end him. It was a bold vow, one that bordered on madness. But boldness was all she had left. The land was weary, suffocating under the commander's weight. Villagers longed for heroes, but heroes never came. Perhaps that was why the burden had fallen. To her, a woman with a broken rifle, a symbol of everything the commander dismissed as weak and irrelevant. Perhaps destiny had chosen her precisely because no one believed she could succeed. That night, as she drifted into restless sleep, she dreamed not of victory, but of resistance. She saw herself standing before the commander, his sneer of arrogance still etched on his face, her broken rifle aimed at his chest. Whether the weapon fired or not, she didn't care. What mattered was the defiance, the refusal to kneel. In her dream, the land behind her roared not with fear, but with freedom. When she awoke, the fire inside her burned brighter. The rifle was still broken. The enemy was still powerful. The people were still silent. But for the first time, she believed. She believed that promises, even when shattered, could be remade. She believed that broken tools could still carve history. And, most of all, she believed that the commander, no matter how untouchable he seemed, was only a man. And men could bleed. The camp was alive with voices, but hers remained absent. Men gathered around the fire, retelling stories of battles they had never fought, victories they had never earned. Their laughter carried bravado, masking their fear. Every clink of their mugs, every bark of laughter, echoed into the night, as if to scare away the looming specter of war. She sat at the edge of the circle, her rifle across her lap, silent. Silence had always been her companion. It was not weakness. It was survival. She remembered silence from childhood. The silence of empty cupboards when famine struck. The silence of her mother's face, hardened like stone after days of toil. The silence of watching her father buried in the earth, while the overseers returned to their feasts. Her life had been built in silence, and though others mistook it for fear, it was strength. She knew silence sharpened the senses. Silence heard things that noise buried. Now, as she held the broken rifle, silence became her weapon. Each evening, while others boasted of how many enemies they would strike, she trained alone. She didn't train with bullets, she had few to spare, and the rifle barely fired them anyway. Instead, she trained her eyes. She studied the way shadows shifted under the moon, how footsteps echoed across dirt versus stone, how a man's breath betrayed his nerves in the dark. She mapped her surroundings, carving invisible paths only she could follow. While others practiced aim, she practiced patience. The soldiers mocked her. There she goes again, staring at the dirt like she found wisdom in the mud. Maybe she's praying to her broken rifle, another jeered. Or maybe she's imagining what it's like to be useful. She ignored them. The weight of their words pressed against her chest, but she carried it quietly. What they didn't realize was that silence carried a strange kind of power. When they laughed, they revealed their fears. When they mocked, they betrayed their insecurities. Every insult aimed at her was really a mirror of their own doubts. She collected those doubts like ammunition. She knew the commander's army was no different. Soldiers of power boasted to cover fear. Leaders roared commands to hide uncertainty. And commanders wrapped themselves in arrogance to disguise vulnerability. If silence could strip away masks, then silence would become her battlefield. One night, as the camp slept, she ventured beyond the safety of their tents. The forest around them pulsed with danger. Wolves howled in the distance. Branches cracked under unseen weight. Yet she moved with deliberate steps, her breath steady. The moonlight kissed her rifle, making its flaws glisten. She tested the trigger again. It jammed, as always. But in the stillness of the forest, she realized something. A broken rifle could still strike terror if wielded with conviction. Enemies didn't always see the truth. They saw what they believed. And belief, she realized, was the sharpest blade of all. She crouched by a stream, dipping her hands into the icy water, letting it wash away the dust of camp. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, lips pressed in determination, hair tangled by wind. For a moment, doubt pierced her resolve. She was no soldier, no commander, no chosen hero. She was one woman with a weapon that barely worked. Could she truly believe she had the power to strike down a man who commanded thousands? Her reflection didn't answer. Silence did. And in silence, she found herself repeating her vow. If I am broken, then I will fight as broken. Over the following weeks, her silence drew unexpected attention. A few others, young recruits, villagers pressed into service. Widows who had nothing left to lose watched her from afar. They saw how she trained, how she endured their comrades' ridicule without flinching. Slowly, they began to approach. What do you see out there when you stare so long at the night? One boy asked. Patterns, she replied simply. The world speaks if you listen. And what do you hear? He pressed. The weaknesses of men who think themselves strong. The boy said nothing more, but he returned the next night and the night after. Soon others followed. She did not recruit them with grand speeches. She did not promise glory or riches. She simply let her silence speak for her. They trained with her in the shadows, learning to move without sound, to watch without being seen, to strike only when the moment demanded. They called themselves nothing. They swore no oaths, but they began to believe. The commanders of her own camp remained blind. They dismissed her as an outcast, unaware she was forging a force that would one day matter more than their entire regiment. The silence that had once been her loneliness became a chorus. But silence is not without weight. It pressed on her shoulders at night, whispering her fears back into her ear. What if she led these few into death? What if the commander crushed them as easily as an insect beneath his heel? Every night she wrestled with these doubts, clutching her broken rifle as though it could anchor her. And then came the raid. The commander's soldiers struck at dawn, their boots pounding like thunder, their torches painting fire across the horizon. Panic erupted in camp. Men scrambled for their polished rifles, shouting orders that drowned each other out. In the sigh, chaos, silence guided her. She moved swiftly, not toward the fire, but into the shadows. She gathered her small circle, her silent students, and together they struck, not with force, but with precision. They cut supply lines, disoriented enemy patrols, and vanished before anyone could catch them. Her broken rifle fired once that morning. The bullet missed, But the sound echoed across the valley, confusing the enemy, making them believe more fighters were hidden in the dark. That single shot, unreliable as it was, changed the flow of the battle. When the dust settled, her camp had survived. Many credited luck. Some claimed the commander's men hadn't been serious in their attack. Few noticed how silence had turned chaos into order, how one broken rifle had sown fear in the enemy's mind. But those who trained with her knew. They looked at her differently. Now not with pity, but with respect. Still, she said nothing. In the days that followed, rumors spread. Some whispered she was a witch, bending fate with her silence. Others called her a shadow, a ghost who haunted the battlefield. She did not correct them. Let them think what they would. Every rumor was another layer of armor, another weapon forged from doubt. And so she carried the weight of silence, not as a burden, but as a shield. Where others shouted for glory, she listened for opportunity. Where others trusted weapons, she trusted patience. Where others feared the commander's power, she studied his flaws. The commander still loomed like a storm on the horizon. His name still silenced villages. His armies still moved like an unstoppable tide. But tides could be turned. Storms could break, and silence could cut deeper than any roar. For now, she remained unnoticed, underestimated, even mocked. But she understood something the others did not. Silence was never empty. Silence was waiting. And when the time came, silence would strike louder than thunder. The broken rifle had become part of her, as familiar as her own heartbeat. By now she knew every quirk of its stiff trigger, every flaw in its bent barrel, every hesitation in its misfiring chamber. What others dismissed as weakness, she had turned into a lesson. To fight with nothing, she realized, was to fight with everything that could not be taken away: wit, courage, and patience. The raid had changed her. For the first time, she had proven that she could shape battle without firing a perfect shot. Yet she refused to rest on that small victory. The commander's shadow still stretched across the land, swallowing villages whole. He had not even noticed her yet, and that was her greatest weapon: invisibility. By day she blended with the others, training when ordered, eating in silence, pretending to be just another nameless soldier. By night she disappeared into the trees with her small circle, the ones who had chosen to follow her. They were misfits like herself, too young, too broken, too overlooked. A boy who had lost his father to the commander's men, a widow who refused to bow her head, a farmer who had traded his plow for rebellion. They came not for glory, but because they had nothing left to lose. She taught them as she had taught herself. "Do not fight where he is strong," she whispered one night, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Fight where he is blind. The commander trusts his power too much. We will use his arrogance against him." She showed them how to move without sound, how to breathe in rhythm with the forest, how to read shadows instead of eyes. She scattered them into the night, watching as they vanished and reappeared like smoke. Their rifles, though functional, were rarely fired. Ammunition was scarce, and every bullet wasted was a weapon lost. Instead, she trained them to think differently, to cut supply lines, to mislead patrols, to turn the land itself into a weapon. One evening, as they crouched in the tall grass near an enemy outpost, she pointed to a wagon stacked with crates. "What do you see?" she asked. "Supplies," the boy said. "Food," the farmer added. "Power," she corrected. "Not theirs, ours." Under her command, they slipped like shadows into the camp, cutting the wagon's harness ropes, scattering its contents into the mud. When the commander's soldiers awoke, chaos erupted. Men shouted, tripping over crates, blaming one another. In the confusion, her small band was already gone, leaving behind no trace but the damage. Each act was small supplies lost here, Patrols misled there, but they were needles pricking the skin of a giant. Slowly, the commander's men began to feel the sting. Her rifle remained silent most nights, a hollow weight in her hands. She did not trust it to fire when she needed it most, but she trusted what it had taught her: creativity. A straight-shooting weapon made a soldier lazy, relying on brute force. A broken rifle forced her to think differently, to imagine possibilities others overlooked. In that weakness, she found freedom, but fighting with nothing carried a cost. Her body bore the toll of exhaustion. Nights spent crawling through mud, days hiding her true work from her commanders. Hours spent drilling her ragtag circle, all of it left her weary. Sometimes she collapsed by the fire, clutching the rifle like a lifeline, wondering if her defiance was madness. Yet each time doubt crept in, she remembered the faces of the villagers, their hollow eyes filled with fear. If she gave up, they would never find hope. One night, while scouting a ridge that overlooked a valley road, she saw the commander for the first time. He rode at the head of his column, armored and proud, his banner whipping in the wind. His soldiers marched in perfect rhythm, their boots shaking the ground like thunder. Villagers lined the road, their heads bowed low, too afraid to look up. The commander's laughter carried above the noise, a sound thick with cruelty. From the shadows, she watched him closely. Every movement, every gesture, every sneer etched into her memory. He was larger than life, yes, but not untouchable. She saw how he leaned heavily on his right side, as if an old injury still nagged at him. She saw how he trusted his men too much, rarely glancing over his shoulder. She saw arrogance dripping from his every step. The boy beside her whispered, "He's a monster." "No," she said, tightening her grip on her rifle. "He's a man, and men can bleed." That night, she could not sleep. The commander's image burned in her mind, his laughter echoing like a curse. She replayed his movements, searching for weakness. Her broken rifle lay across her knees, its metal glinting in the firelight. She pressed her forehead against it, whispering as if to a companion, "You and I, we were not meant to win. But perhaps that is why we will." In the days that followed, her small circle grew bolder. They staged ambushes on isolated patrols, never staying long enough to be caught. They left false trails, tricking the commander's men into chasing ghosts. They stole supplies and redistributed them to starving villagers, leaving behind only a broken rifle carved into the dirt as their mark. Word began to spread of shadows in the night, of rebels who fought with nothing, yet made the commander's men tremble. The laughter that once followed her in camp began to fade. Soldiers still sneered, but their voices carried less certainty. Some even sought her out in secret, asking to join her training. She accepted few. Too many would draw attention. Her strength lay not in numbers, but in invisibility. Still, she knew the balance was fragile. One mistake, one moment of arrogance, and they would be crushed. She drilled this into her companions. We do not fight for glory. We fight to survive. We fight so others may see that the commander can be defied. And in the quiet of her own heart, she added another truth. We fight so that I may face him one day, not as prey, but as hunter. The broken rifle never left her side. It misfired, jammed, and frustrated her at every turn. Yet she refused to discard it. To abandon, it would be to abandon herself. She carried it not for its strength, but for its lesson. In the end, victory would not come from perfect weapons or overwhelming numbers. It would come from the will to endure, to adapt, to strike when least expected. And so she learned to fight with nothing. By the time the commander would notice her, it would be too late. For weeks, his name had lived only in whispers. The commander was a legend of cruelty, a shadowy figure whose deeds were spoken of around campfires with trembling voices. Villagers told of how he burned crops to starve the hungry, how he executed fathers in front of their children, how he silenced entire towns with one command. But whispers were not enough. She needed to see him, to understand him, to strip away the myth and find the man within. That chance came on a mist-heavy morning. She and her small band crouched on a hillside overlooking the main road. The forest was still, as though nature itself held its breath. Then the sound came, the rhythmic thunder of marching boots. Through the fog, a column emerged, rows of armored soldiers moving like one beast, their banners snapping in the wind. And at the center, astride a black horse that seemed carved from night, was the commander himself. He was not dressed in the simple uniform of his men. His armor gleamed, polished to a cruel shine, and crimson threads lined his cloak, marking him as more than mortal in the eyes of his followers. His face was sharp, carved by years of command, his expression cold and unyielding. He looked neither left nor right, as though the world itself bent to him. Villagers lined the road, heads bowed, too afraid to meet his eyes. From the hillside, she watched, her breath shallow. Her companions shifted nervously. "He looks untouchable," the farmer whispered. "He bleeds like the rest of us," she replied. Though her voice was tight, she studied every detail. The commander favored his right leg, leaning slightly. In the saddle? Old injury, perhaps. His men moved in perfect rhythm, but their eyes betrayed unease. They watched him as much as they watched the road, bound by loyalty, but also by fear. The commander carried not just weapons, but an aura, a presence that bent others to his will. This was the enemy. Her rifle felt heavier than ever. She imagined lifting it, aiming at him, pulling the stiff trigger. One shot, if it landed, could end him here and now. But the rifle was broken, unreliable, more symbol than weapon. A misfire would reveal her position, and the moment would be lost. She lowered it slowly. Her time had not yet come. Instead, she whispered to her companions, "Watch him. Learn him. He is not a god. He is a man, and men can bleed." That night, the vision of him haunted her. His laugh, deep and cruel, echoed in her mind. She remembered how villagers shrank under his gaze, how soldiers carried themselves with fear disguised as loyalty. Power like his did not rest only in weapons. It lived in belief. His men believed he was invincible. The people believed resistance was hopeless. And so long as belief favored him, he was untouchable. She realized then that her true battle was not just with the commander himself. It was with the myth of his invincibility. The next weeks became a test of patience. She and her group stalked his patrols, never attacking directly, but sowing unease. Supply wagons went missing in the night. Scouts vanished without a trace. Fires broke out in storage depots. Each act was precise, designed not to kill many, but to unsettle. Rumors began to spread among the commander's men of shadows in the woods, of whispers that could not be silenced, of an unseen hand striking at their edges. The commander responded with fury. Villages near the disruptions were punished brutally. Entire families were dragged from their homes, accused of harboring rebels. His soldiers marched harder, their discipline tightened, their fear masked by brutality. Yet in their eyes, doubt had been planted. From the shadows, she watched him. She saw the way his temper flared when reports of missing supplies reached him, the way he barked at his officers, the way his soldiers trembled under his gaze. Cracks in the armor, small, but there. One night, while perched on a ridge, she whispered to her rifle, "He is not untouchable. Not forever." But with every act of defiance came greater danger. Her group grew restless. The boy asked, "When will we strike him directly? When will we end this?" "Not yet," she answered. Patience will kill him faster than bullets. Still, doubt crept among them. They wanted a battle, a moment of glory. She knew better. The commander thrived on open confrontation. To face him head-on with broken weapons and weary bodies would be suicide. Their strength lay in silence, in shadows, in waiting for the one moment when his arrogance would blind him. That moment came sooner than she expected. During a routine march, the commander's column halted in the valley. Word spread quickly. An ambush had been suspected. His soldiers spread wide, searching the trees. Her small group was watching from the cliffs above, hearts pounding. For the first time, the commander himself dismounted, striding into the open with defiance. He barked. Orders, his voice carrying like thunder. She watched him from above, her broken rifle pressed against her chest. Every part of her screamed to take the shot, to end it here, to silence the storm with one pull of the trigger. Her finger brushed the stiff metal, but the weapon betrayed her. The chamber jammed, the trigger refusing to move. She lowered it, slowly, heart racing. Not yet, not here. Instead, she whispered to her companions, "Remember this. He thinks himself untouchable. That arrogance will be his downfall." The commander mounted again, rallying his men with laughter. "You think shadows frighten me?" He roared. His soldiers cheered, though their voices trembled. The column marched on. That night, her companions argued. Some wanted to strike boldly, to prove the commander could bleed. Others feared the wrath that would follow. She listened in silence, then spoke. "We do not fight him where he is strong. We fight him where he is blind. Let him think us weak. Let him think us nothing. When he sees us, it will be too late." They fell quiet, trusting her. For days afterward, she replayed the moment on the cliff, the commander in her sights, the rifle failing her, the chance slipping away. But instead of despair, she felt clarity. The broken rifle was not her enemy. It was her teacher. It reminded her that power did not come from steel. It came from timing, from patience, from the refusal to kneel. The commander had appeared. He was real, flesh and blood, not myth. And one day, she swore, he would fall. The night was thick with smoke and fear. The commander's forces had pushed deeper into the valley, their boots crushing crops, their torches burning barns, their laughter ringing like cruel bells. Villagers fled into the hills, clutching children, and scraps of food. Her group watched from the shadows, powerless to save everyone. Rage burned in her chest, but rage was dangerous. It blinded, it tempted foolishness. Yet this time, patience would not protect them. The commander had come. Too close. His army was moving toward her own camp, and if they fell, there would be no hiding, no shadows left to fight from. The impossible had come. They would have to face him directly. Her companions gathered around her in the dark, their faces pale. "This is madness," the farmer muttered. "We can't fight him head-on," the widow whispered. "If we run, we'll be hunted," she answered, her voice steady. "If we fight, we have a chance, small, but a chance." The boy looked at her broken rifle. "That thing won't kill him." She gripped it tighter, meeting his eyes. "It doesn't need to. I don't need perfection. I only need one mistake from him." One moment. They said nothing more. Words were useless now. When dawn broke, the battlefield was already painted in fire. The commander's men advanced with banners raised high, their discipline a wall of iron. Her small band scattered, darting through trees and rocks, striking at the flanks, cutting down stragglers before melting back into the mist. It was not enough. The commander's army pressed forward, unyielding. Then she saw him at the front, mounted on his black horse, his crimson cloak rippling like blood. He laughed as his soldiers torched another hut, as if destruction itself was a game. The sight ignited her fury, but she swallowed it down. Fury would not win this. Strategy would. She moved quickly, signaling her band to lead him toward the gorge. For weeks she had studied the land, memorized every slope, every loose rock, every hiding place. If they could not overpower him, they would trap him. The commander noticed the resistance and spurred his horse forward. "Show yourselves, cowards," he roared, his voice rolling across the valley. Soldiers cheered, emboldened by his presence. To them, he was invincible. To her, he was walking into the jaws of his own arrogance. At the gorge, she stood alone, rifle in hand. Her companions hid in the ridges above, waiting. The air grew still. The only sound the crackle of burning fields behind them. She could see the commander's face clearly now, his sneer, his contempt, his certainty that she was nothing. He dismounted, stepping toward her with deliberate slowness. "This is what they send me?" He laughed, gesturing to her broken weapon. "A girl with a useless rifle? You should have stayed in the shadows, little ghost. I'll snuff you out. Myself." Around them, his soldiers gathered in a circle, hungry for the spectacle. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She raised the rifle, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Click. Silence. The weapon jammed, just as it always did. The commander threw back his head and laughed, the sound booming like thunder. "Pathetic," he roared. "This is your rebellion? This is your hope?" But while he laughed, she moved. Every step he took forward, she took sideways, drawing him closer to the cliff's edge, closer to the trap she had prepared. Her companions shifted above, waiting for her signal. "You think me a fool?" The commander snarled, lunging forward. She dodged, her rifle a shield more than a weapon. His blade cut the air inches from her face. Around them, soldiers jeered, cheering their leader on. But arrogance blinds, and his was blinding him now. At the precise moment, she stomped her foot on the earth, sending a sharp echo up the gorge. Her companions loosed the ropes they had. Set the night before. Rocks tumbled down the ridges, crashing into the circle of soldiers, scattering them in panic. Dust filled the air. Confusion erupted. The commander spun, furious, but in that moment of distraction, she struck. She swung the rifle like a staff, its heavy steel slamming into his side. He staggered, caught off guard. Pain flashed across his face, and for the first time, his laughter faltered. The crowd of soldiers fell silent. She raised the broken rifle again, standing firm. "You are not a god," she shouted, her voice carrying through the dust. "You are a man, and men can bleed." Her words pierced deeper than any bullet. Doubt rippled through the soldiers. They had never seen their commander stumble, never heard him grunt in pain. The myth of his invincibility cracked before their eyes. He roared in rage, charging at her. Their clash was brutal, his strength against her resilience, his blade against her broken steel. Sparks flew with each strike. Her arms ached, her body screamed, but she refused to yield. Every parry, every dodge was another second one. She didn't need to defeat him with strength. She only needed to survive until his arrogance consumed him. And then it happened. His foot slipped on the loose gravel of the gorge. Just for a heartbeat, his stance broke. She seized the moment, driving the butt of her rifle into his chest with all her strength. He stumbled back, eyes wide, arms flailing. As he fought for balance, the cliff loomed behind him. He caught himself at the last instant, barely avoiding the fall, but the damage was done. His soldiers had seen it. Their commander, unshakable, untouchable, had faltered before a woman with a broken rifle. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. Breathing hard, she leveled the useless rifle at him once more. "Your power is built on fear," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "But fear can be broken. Just like you." The commander's face twisted in fury, but he did not lunge again. He barked orders, his voice sharp, commanding his soldiers to retreat. Reluctantly, they obeyed, dragging him back to safety. She stood alone in the gorge, her chest heaving, her rifle trembling in her hands. She had not killed him. Not yet. But she had wounded something greater than flesh, his myth, and that wound would spread. Her companions rushed to her side, their faces alight with disbelief. "You did it," the boy whispered. "You stood against him. You made him bleed." She shook her head. "Not yet. But the battle has begun." And deep in her heart, she knew the truth. The impossible had been faced, and the impossible had been shaken. The gorge still smelled of dust and fire when the commander's soldiers pulled back. Their retreat was not a rout, but neither was a triumph. They left behind silence, broken wagons, and whispers too heavy to suppress. For the first time, the commander had stumbled, and though he lived, his men carried away more than his body. They carried away the memory of his faltering. She stood amid the ruins, gripping the bent rifle like a banner. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, and every muscle screamed with exhaustion. But she stood tall, because standing was victory enough. Her companions gathered around her, their eyes wide with awe. "You made him bleed," the boy said again, voice trembling between fear and wonder. "Not enough," she answered, though her own heart pounded with the same disbelief. "But it is a beginning." They had not slain the beast, but they had cracked his armor. And sometimes a crack was more powerful than a kill. Cracks spread, cracks grew, cracks brought walls down. In the days that followed, rumors spread faster than fire. Villagers whispered of the nameless woman who had faced the commander with nothing but a broken rifle. Soldiers who once mocked her now stared in uneasy silence when she passed. Some even avoided her gaze, as though afraid to glimpse the quiet force that had made their commander stumble. Her circle grew. Refugees sought her out, begging to join. Wounded soldiers limped to her camp, offering what strength they had left. She accepted carefully too many, and the shadows would no longer protect them, but enough to make their presence felt. She trained them as she always had, not to fight with strength, but with silence. Ambush became sharper, sabotage more precise. They struck not at the commander's chest, but at his veins, supplies, scouts, whispers of loyalty. Wherever his men marched, fear of shadows followed. The commander, humiliated, struck back with fury. Entire villages were burned as warnings. Captives were executed at dawn in front of weeping crowds. His soldiers roared louder, marched harder, trying to prove their invincibility was unbroken. Yet the harder they tried, the more hollow their confidence sounded. She watched it unfold, with cold patience. Every cruel act he committed to restore his myth only spread doubt further. For if he was truly unshakable, why did shadows bother him? Why did one broken rifle unsettle an army? One night, as her band rested in the woods, the widow approached her. "You've done the impossible," she said softly. She shook her head. "No, not yet. You've turned fear against him. You've made his soldiers question." She stared into the fire, her rifle across her knees. Doubt is not defeat. He still stands. But in her heart, she knew the widow was right. Victory was no longer measured in bodies, but in belief, and belief had begun to shift. The turning point came during a raid. Her group struck an outpost, guarding the commander's supply line. They had planned to steal food and vanish, as always. But when they broke through the gates, something unexpected happened. Half the soldiers dropped their weapons and fled without a fight. Her band froze in disbelief. The widow whispered, "They're afraid. Afraid not of death, but of her." That night, as they feasted on stolen bread for the first time in weeks, she said nothing. But inside, a storm brewed. She had always fought with the knowledge that she was nothing, a girl with a broken rifle, invisible and powerless. Now she realized that invisibility had become something greater. To her enemies, she was not nothing. She was unknown, a shadow, a myth in her own right. And myths were stronger than weapons. The commander knew it too. His fury grew, but so did his caution. He no longer rode so boldly at the front. He tightened his guard, his cloak no longer flowing free, but wrapped close around him. The arrogance was still there, but cracked, wary. Her companions noticed. "He fears you," the boy whispered one night. "He fears what I represent," she corrected. "That he is not invincible, that his empire of fear is built on sand." The boy frowned. Then why not finish it now? Why wait? She looked at her broken rifle, the old metal catching the firelight. "Because I don't need to kill him yet. Every day he lives in doubt is another victory." But she knew the truth. Sooner or later, the storm would break. The commander would not allow the myth of her resistance to grow unchecked. He would come for her. And when he did, the broken rifle would have to finish what it had begun. That moment came sooner than she expected. At dawn, horns blared across the hills. The commander's army marched straight toward their camp. No longer probing, no longer playing. This was no raid. This was extermination. Her band scrambled, panic in their eyes. "There are too many," the farmer cried. "We can't hold them," shouted another. She stood firm, rifle in hand. Her voice cut through the chaos like steel. "We don't hold them. We break them. Not with strength, with doubt." She divided her fighters into small groups, sending them to harry the flanks, to vanish into the woods, to strike and disappear. Every scream, every crash of rocks, every whisper in the trees fed the soldiers' unease. At the center, she stood alone. Visible, her broken rifle raised high. The commander spotted her immediately. His roar split the morning air. There she is, the shadow with the broken toy. His men surged forward, hungry for revenge. She fired her rifle. Once the shot went wide, but the sound echoed like thunder. The soldiers faltered, glancing around as though expecting more shadows to appear. Panic rippled through their lines. Her companions struck from the ridges, their ambush timed to her single shot. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. And through it all, she remained standing, the broken rifle her banner. She shouted above the noise. "He is not a god. He is only a man." The words cut deeper than arrows. Soldiers broke rank, some fleeing, others hesitating. For the first time, the commander's army bent under the weight of belief turned against them. By the time the sun set, the impossible had happened. The commander's forces withdrew in disarray, leaving behind weapons, wagons, even their wounded. Her band, bruised and bloodied, but alive, gathered around her. The boy fell to his knees, laughing through tears. "We did it. We won." She sank to the ground, clutching the broken rifle. Her body was shattered, her strength nearly gone, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. It had not been a perfect victory. The commander still lived, still roared his defiance. But his army had bent, his myth had cracked, and she had proven what no one dared believe. That victory was possible, even with nothing. And in the silence that followed, she whispered to her rifle, "We are not done." The valley had not known silence in months. Smoke curled endlessly from blackened fields, the echo of boots and screams never far behind. Yet now, for the first time, the land seemed to hold its breath. Both sides were waiting, watching, bracing, for the clash that would decide everything. She stood at the edge of the forest, the broken rifle across her back, her eyes on the horizon. The commander's defeat at the gorge and his retreat from the valley had spread like wildfire. Villagers whispered her name with reverence, though she had never given them one. To them, she was simply the woman with the broken rifle. A myth. A hope, but myths could not rest. Myths were hunted. The commander, humiliated and furious, rallied his strength. Reports flowed in daily. Fresh recruits from distant lands, brutal raids meant to crush rebellion, new banners rising under his command. His empire of fear was staggering, but not yet broken. And now, his sights were fixed squarely on her. Her companions saw it too. The widow spoke what all feared one night as they sat by the fire. "He will not stop until you are ash in the dirt," she nodded. "And ash is what he'll have to fight." The breaking point came with little warning. Scouts returned breathless one morning, eyes wide with terror. "He's coming," they gasped. "The commander his army marches here. Not patrols, not raids, all of them." A camp fell into chaos. Farmers clutched rusted blades. Children were rushed into hiding. Fighters sharpened their meager weapons with shaking hands. For many, this was the end. But for her, it was the moment she had been preparing for all along. She climbed a rock at the camp's center, the broken rifle raised high. The people stilled at once, every eye upon her. She felt their fear like a tide threatening to drown them. But fear, she knew, could be turned. "They think us weak," she shouted, her voice steady as stone. "They think us broken. They think shadows cannot fight an army, but they are wrong. We are the storm they never expected. We are the proof that he can bleed." A murmur rose, swelling into a roar. For the first time, her people looked at the approaching battle, not with despair, but with a spark of defiance. The next morning, the earth itself shook under the commanders. "Advance." His army stretched across the horizon, armored and disciplined, a river of steel. At its head rode the commander, his black horse gleaming, his crimson cloak a banner of blood. His laughter echoed across the fields as though daring her to appear. And she did. She walked alone into the open, the broken rifle in her hands. Behind her, her fighters melted into the trees, invisible as always. To the commander, it looked like madness, one woman standing against an army. He sneered, raising his hand to halt his men. "Well, well," he called, his voice booming. "The little ghost shows herself. Tell me, girl, do you come to kneel or to die?" Her voice carried back, sharp as steel. "Neither. I come to end you." Laughter rippled through his ranks. Yet beneath it, she saw unease flicker in their eyes. They remembered the gorge. They remembered the retreat. The commander dismounted, stepping forward with deliberate arrogance. His men parted, forming a ring around them. He wanted spectacle. He wanted to crush her himself, to restore his broken myth with blood. So be it. Their duel was brutal from the first clash. His blade whistled through the air, heavy and precise. She parried with the rifle, each strike jarring her bones, each dodge stealing her breath. He was stronger, faster, trained in the art of war. She was only endurance, stubbornness, and the will to outlast him. "You cannot win," he snarled, driving her back step by step. "Then why do you fear me?" She spat, swinging the rifle hard across his arm. The crowd of soldiers roared at every strike, their voices a storm around them. To them, this was more than a fight. It was the battle for belief itself. Her arms ached, her body screamed for rest, but she refused to yield. Every time she faltered, she remembered the faces of the villagers who had suffered, the companions who trusted her, the whispers of hope carried on the wind. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all of them. And slowly, she saw at the cracks. His breath grew heavier, his strikes a fraction slower. His arrogance had carried him far, but arrogance did not fuel endless strength. "You bleed," she whispered, as her rifle slammed into his shoulder. He staggered, rage twisting his face. "You bleed!" Blood stained his cloak. Gasps rippled through the soldiers. The myth shattered a little more. But victory was not yet hers. With a roar, he struck harder, his blade slicing across her side. Pain exploded through her, hot and blinding. She stumbled, nearly falling. Her vision blurred, the world tilting. The commander grinned, raising his blade high for the killing blow. "This ends now, little ghost." At that instant, the boy, her youngest companion, burst from the trees with a shout, hurling a stone that struck the commander's helm. It barely staggered him, but it was enough. His strike missed its mark, the blade sinking into the dirt. Rage erupted in his ranks as her fighters stormed from the trees, striking with the fury of shadows turned storm. Arrows rained, blades clashed, and chaos consumed the field. She forced herself upright, gripping the broken rifle with bloody hands. The world spun, but she steadied herself, eyes locked on the commander. "This doesn't end," she hissed through clenched teeth, "until you fall." Their weapons clashed again, the sound like thunder rolling through the valley. By dusk, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Smoke choked the sky, corpses littered the ground, and blood stained the earth. Both sides were battered, broken, bleeding. But neither she nor the commander had fallen. He stood across the carnage, chest heaving, his once crimson cloak tattered and stained. She stood opposite, swaying but unyielding, the broken rifle cracked but still in her hands. They locked eyes across the battlefield. No words were spoken, but the truth was clear. The final reckoning had not yet come. Both lived. Both burned with unfinished fury. The commander snarled and signaled his retreat. His men obeyed, dragging their wounded away. Her fighters gathered around her, exhausted but alive. The widow pressed a hand to her wound, whispering, "You should be dead." She shook her head weakly, clutching the rifle. "Not yet, not until he falls." And as the sun bled into the horizon, she knew the truth. Everything had led to this breaking point. There would be no more running, no more waiting. The next time they met, one would not rise again. The wound in her side burned with every breath. For days after the battle, she drifted between fever and clarity, her companions tending to her with what little medicine they could find. Yet even as her body fought for survival, her mind burned, with only one thought: it is not over. A commander still lived, and as long as he breathed, the shadow of his cruelty stretched over the land. News trickled in from villages. His army had retreated, but not broken. He was rallying what forces. He had left, gathering them like a wounded wolf retreating to its den. His pride had been slashed open, his invincibility shattered, but he clung to power with the desperation of a drowning man. She could feel it in her bones. The end was near. One more battle. One more stand. Her companions argued bitterly as she rose from her bed too soon. "You cannot fight again," the widow said, clutching her arm. "You'll die." "I will die if I do not," she replied, voice hoarse but unshakable. The boy, eyes wide with fear, whispered, "Then let us go with you." She shook her head. "This last fight is mine." But even as she said it, she knew they would not leave her side. They had followed her this far, through shadow and fire, through hunger and despair. They were bound not by orders, but by faith. Faith in her. Faith in what she had become. They marched together at dawn, ragged but unbroken, toward the fortress where the commander had gathered his strength. It loomed on the horizon, stone walls bristling with soldiers, banners snapping in the wind. It was more fortress than army. Now his last refuge, his throne of desperation. To storm it was madness. To walk away was surrender. She chose madness. The battle erupted at dusk. Her band struck first, silent as always, slipping past outer patrols, cutting down guards before. Alarms could ring, but soon the fortress boiled with defenders, torches flaring, steel clashing in the smoke-filled night. Through the chaos, she moved like a shadow given flesh, her broken rifle swinging with merciless precision. Each strike echoed the years of suffering, each parry the voice of the voiceless. She was not the strongest on the field, not the fastest, but she was the storm they had all whispered of, and storms did not falter. Her companions fought around her, fierce and loyal. The boy loosed arrows from the walls. The widow slashed with fury. The farmer swung a blade, once meant for plowing. They fought not as soldiers, but as people who had found something greater than fear. And then she saw him. The commander stood at the fortress gate, his black armor dented and bloodied, his crimson cloak torn but still defiant. His eyes burned with hatred, his voice thundering above the clash. "You!" he roared, spotting her across the carnage. "This ends tonight." She raised the broken rifle high, her voice carrying through smoke and screams. "Yes, it does." Their final duel was nothing like the last. There was no circle of soldiers cheering, no spectacle of arrogance. This was raw survival, stripped of pride. He swung with desperation, his blade heavy, his strikes fueled by fury rather than precision. She met him blow for blow, her rifle splintering with each clash, her wounds screaming with every motion. Blood blurred her vision, but she pressed. You've taken everything from me," he spat, driving her back against the stone wall. "You built everything on fear," she answered, deflecting his strike with a cracked barrel. "And fear cannot last." With a roar, he lunged, his blade aimed for her heart. She twisted at the last instant, the steel grazing her ribs instead. Pain seared through her, but she used it turning, driving the butt of the rifle into his jaw. He reeled, stunned. She did not hesitate. With a cry that tore from the depths of her soul, she swung the rifle with both hands. The old weapon cracked, splintering as it smashed across his head. He staggered, blood pouring down his face. For the first time, the commander fell to his knees. His soldiers froze. The battlefield stilled. She stood above him, chest heaving, the broken rifle now more splinter than steel. He looked up at her, hatred and disbelief in his eyes. "You are nothing," he hissed. She raised the shattered weapon one last time. Nothing can topple everything. And with a final strike, she ended him. The fortress fell silent. Soldiers dropped their weapons, some fleeing, others kneeling. Without their commander, their will crumbled. The myth that had bound them was gone, shattered by the very woman they had once mocked. Her companions rushed to her side, supporting her as her strength finally gave way. The boy, tears streaking his dirt-covered face, whispered, "You did it. You ended him." She shook her head weakly, staring at the splintered rifle in her hands. "We did it. All of us. The broken, the forgotten, the weak." And then she collapsed. When she awoke, the war was over. The commander's empire had dissolved in days, his soldiers scattering like dust without the weight of his shadow. Villages celebrated in firelit nights, songs rising where once there had only been silence. But she did not stay to bask in victory. One morning, before the sun rose, she left the camp with nothing but her shattered rifle. Her companions searched for her, but she was gone, vanished, like the ghost she had always been. Years later, stories spread across the land of the woman with the broken rifle who faced an empire and toppled its commander, of the myth who proved that strength was not in weapons, but in will. Children played at being her, lifting sticks like rifles, shouting her words. "He is not a god. He is a man, and men can bleed." No one knew where she went. Some said she wandered to other lands in need. Others swore she lived quietly in a village, her name forgotten, but her story alive. The broken rifle was never found, but it did not need to be. Its legacy was everywhere in every whisper of defiance, every spark of rebellion, every person who dared to stand when the world told them to kneel. She had been given nothing, and with nothing, she had changed everything.